Hi everyone. Maybe you have been wondering, has she given up the in-depths for the first listen she's doing? And I can understand the question because it's been a while. But no, I'm not giving them up. It takes me a bit longer right now. I have a little baby. I have all kinds of things going on. It's the middle of the end of the academic year for students, so they're preparing for exams. Lots of stuff happening. But here I am, finally, with another in-depth, this time for Boston Foreplay Longtime. And yes, they come one at a time, trickling out right now, but they're coming. So, with Boston, in my first listen, you might remember that I made a comment about the lyrics and even the music not necessarily being really deep, profound. And I said that that was perfectly fine and acceptable, and I stand by that. However, I did discover something as I spent a bit more time with it, and I want to share it with you because I found it enjoyable to experience in this way myself. The title and the lyrics, well, the title is two actually, Foreplay and Longtime. Now talking about the first part of the title, Foreplay, it's a bit of a play on words. Most obviously, to the casual reader, listener, observer, this title of this instrumental portion of the music is, of course, a sexual reference. And then moving to Longtime, we get the impression that it seems to be talking about the impact of a past relationship, perhaps one that isn't really quite over in a person's feelings, but at the same time they're trying to move on. They feel that they have to move on. That's the first impression we get. And it's a very natural experience, even a common one. But this idea of the first portion, Foreplay, being a sexual reference, and then suddenly cutting to when the relationship is past. It stacks things up a bit, and that interpretation suits the impression I got in the first listen of this music having a sort of wild, restless feel. There's this feeling of wanderlust, the need to travel, to go somewhere. The music itself has this restless, not settling down quality. Even the way in which it has so many different textures and brings in so many different things. First it's doing one thing, then it's doing another, then it's doing another. Kind of like somebody who just isn't meant to sit and dwell in one place, either in their life or in their geographical location. We all know people like that, who just have to move on. And the music works with that idea. On the other hand, though, Foreplay is also a literal translation into English of the word prelude. And prelude is a very, very common thing that we find in music. A prelude is almost a kind of musical work in and of itself. But of course, it was meant to precede, to come before, to be played before, a foreplay before some other part of the musical work, whether it's a fugue or whatever. Going back to the classical tradition that I come from, of course, there are the dozens, even hundreds of preludes and fugues. And that's a kind of an example of the kind of pairing that we have here. We have an instrumental prelude, and then we have, it's not a fugue, but we have something else coming after, which is different. And so this Foreplay can also be interpreted as meaning prelude. And then I also was doing some reading, and I discovered that Tom Scholz, the composer himself, said that Longtime, the part that comes after the prelude, is actually not so much about an ended romantic relationship, but it's about his struggles as a musician. Just like I commented recently with Ren, this recurring theme of the artist having to struggle to create, to have something meaningful to give, and to be able to communicate it to the audience. Tom Scholz said that Longtime, being about his struggles as a musician, it was about the intense pressure and his desire to create something meaningful, his determination that even though he felt like he'd been working for years and years without making progress, he wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to sit back and say, it's not for me. And he had this sense of urgency to make it in the music world. And that is what Tom Scholz was trying to express in these lyrics. And the romantic overtones were his way of expressing the passionate love he had for his craft. This all-consuming love of music and creativity in music. And I enjoyed that insight into these lyrics because I didn't pick that up on my first listen. And I don't know if I would have picked that up just without some little nudge in that direction. And what I read about Tom Scholz's commentary on this piece suddenly was the spark that brought that all into my awareness. And then, taking this second interpretation, that this song and these lyrics are about the passion one has for his musical craft, it reminded me a bit of a couple other songs that I know. One of which is a classical lied by Franz Schubert, An die Musik. And that song, well, it's not so romantically oriented as this one. It's almost like a prayer, but it is extolling and reverencing and appreciating music. And it's an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous setting. The melody itself and the accompaniment itself, they work together with the lyrics to create this wonderful, wonderful final product that, whether you like classical or not, whether you like German Lieder or not, I think you would enjoy An die Musik from that perspective. And so here's a link you can check out. And actually, I want to say here in this moment, there are quite a few links I want to share. And Vlad tells me that there is a limit as to how many links he can put in a video. So if all the links aren't visible on the screen in this video itself, you will find them. He is going to list them underneath in the description. So if you're interested in exploring all these things, check out the description. Now, going back to An die Musik, I wanted to share a few of the words in English. It's originally German, but the English translation says, "Oh, blessed art, how often in dark hours, when the savage ring of life tightens round me, have you kindled warm love in my heart, have transported me to a better world. Often a sigh has escaped from your harp," it says harp, "a sweet, sacred harmony of yours has opened up the heavens to better times for me. Oh, blessed art, I thank you for that." So it's more of a prayer, but I was reminded of it because this song, Longtime, is also taking this feeling of attachment to music and it's couching it in a romantic setting. And that also took me to Vivo per Lei by Andrea Bocelli. Actually, I looked this up and I discovered that he's not the originator of the song. I've only known it as Bocelli's performance. And apparently, when he recorded it, he switched the words up to create this meaning. It was something else before. I just learned that all recently. So I know it as Andrea Bocelli's Vivo per Lei. And if you haven't heard it, it's great. It's worth listening to. And you might be surprised. Here's the link. You might be surprised to find that, oh wow, Amy listens to that? Well, of course it's Andrea Bocelli. I know him, I am familiar, and he is kind of what we call a crossover artist. He has this operatic or classical side, and he takes that style and softens it a bit and makes it more relatable for other people. And so I was listening to this just again recently. It's been ages since I heard it, and I thought, wait a minute, I'm hearing guitar, I'm hearing drums. Oh wow, is this rock? Hold on. And then I looked it up because I was curious. Is this a rock song that I've heard before and I wasn't aware it was rock? Well, Wikipedia classifies it as operatic pop. Of course, all these definitions are a little bit fuzzy around the edges. Some of you might say it has rock influences. Perhaps, in which case, it's something rocky that I've heard before. Anyway, it's a piece of music that I really enjoy and I love. Bocelli's version does this wonderful thing of taking this idea of being in love with her. And the music goes on, and we hear, I live for her. I'm in love with her. I live for her. This is the one I live for. And we feel like it is somebody in love with a woman. And then finally, as the music comes towards the end, is wrapping up, suddenly it is revealed that the her is not a woman, but it's actually music. I live for her because from now on, I have no other way out. Because, I've never truly betrayed music. I live for her because she gives me pauses and notes in freedom. If I had another life, I'd live it for her. I'd live it for her, the music. This is another great example of a song which talks about music and the joy and pleasure and the dedication and the passion we feel for it. And one of the things that I love about it is that it has this sense of mystery. We don't know who this person is in love with. We get sent a different direction until the end, and suddenly we realize this is music. And I guess that's how I feel about Longtime here, because again, we understand at first that this is talking about a relationship with another person and the need to pursue something, to go beyond. And of course, it's a bit different too, because obviously the relationship here, we feel like it's kind of after a breakup in a sense. But that's not, the music is not the thing with whom we've broken up. It is instead the thing that drives us forwards. And there is this romantic element, this love relationship, this passion for it that makes us leave other things behind, that causes us to give up things that perhaps we're quite attached to and are meaningful to us, but music drives us further. And I enjoyed that insight into these lyrics. Again, I wouldn't have picked it up without reading about Scholz's views on it. So those are the lyrics and the thoughts that I had about that, and I hope you enjoyed them as well. I'm curious to hear your response and your thoughts about it. Getting into the music, I'm going to take it section by section because there are two different sections. There's Foreplay, which can either be considered a sexual reference to what comes before, or you can consider it an English version of prelude, or perhaps you can consider it both. A sort of romantic, sensual prelude to this song about the passion we have for music. Of course, it opens with this lovely, light, nimble, fingery organ work. And then, of course, the percussion comes in, tickety, 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 which I loved. I love the way it is so clean, so precise, and it sticks out nice and clear from the other textures. I really feel like this song is about textures. On the topic of percussion, I want to say that the impact of the drums, I really feel. And that is why I said in my first listen that I felt like it was one of the harder pieces of rock music I've listened to. And a lot of you were surprised, saying, really? Harder? Because, I mean, you've listened to some pretty heavy metal stuff and you think this is hard? And I was thinking about that, reading your comments, thinking through, why do I experience this as hard? I don't experience it as hard in an aggressive, invasive way. I experience it as having a lot of powerful impact. And I feel like the drums are placed in such a manner that every time some drum or other is struck, there's enough space around it that we feel that particular moment in the music very powerfully. In other words, I'm not having to contend with, we could say, sensory overload. And I don't feel a need to tune them out because they're too much. And I feel like this is why I experience this as being what I called hard. Perhaps impactful is a better word for it. And as I thought about this some more, I do believe it has to do with the musical arrangement, the balance of the instruments, the interplay between the different instruments. But I began to also wonder if perhaps it also has as much to do with the sound engineering and the production side, because there is this element of clarity and the ability to almost crawl inside the music and explore all the different layers sound-wise without feeling like we're losing anything. It feels like more like a beautifully lush jungle we can crawl into, and we have the ground, and then we have the mid range, and then we have the canopy over the top, and we have all the different layers and the vines going this way and that way. There's this feeling of three-dimensional and being able to get inside the three dimensions of the music. And I am no expert in sound engineering and music production side of things, but I feel like there is a lot of care put into this, which makes it possible for me to experience it this way and experience the impact without having to be assaulted by any part of the music. I love the great get up and walk bass line. Bum 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 bum, and it comes, you hear it in the bass, and then you hear it in the piano, and wherever it is, it's really moving, it's walking. You can imagine yourself walking over a terrain with it, and again, it comes out very, very nicely. And then as we come towards the end of Foreplay, there's that ritardando and allargando section where the music starts to slow down, it starts to expand. There's this feeling of dramatic expansion, which has to do with the pacing and the way all the different rhythmic elements are controlled. And that also is nicely controlled, paced. I feel like it's very well balanced. And within that section and towards the end of that section is where, if you remember in my first listen, and if you haven't watched my first listen, you should check it out here. Here's the link. Is where I got kind of excited about the harmonic progressions there. And of course, it featured in the organ, but it was all the instruments together. And I was talking about the chords moving from one to the next and the suspensions and the progressions. And I said that I would talk a bit about that. And so I want to talk a bit about that here, now, and tell you what it is that I loved about it and why it is that I relate so easily to it. One of the things that features in this piece of music is what we call a pedal point. And it goes back to the organ, because with an organ, you have this whole rank of pedals, and you can set your foot on one pedal and just let it sit there forever and ever and ever, as long as the organ's lungs survive, and your hands can be running around doing other things. That's how we came up with the term pedal point. But of course, it can be used in other instruments as well. You can hear it in orchestra music, where the bass instruments are playing something. So occasionally you'll hear it up higher, but it's usually a deep, low bass sustained note. And that note stays there regardless what's going on above it. So we can have chords changing above it, and this particular pedal point doesn't move. We have that in this piece of music. And the pedal point is a C. I'm going to play it here. I could play it down here. Maybe I will sometimes, because it has a wonderful sound. That's about as organ sounding as I can make the harp be. And then we have these chords, and I'm going to name the chords above first so that you can follow along. And maybe you want to play around with this on your instrument, whether it's guitar or keyboard, or you could even try something like this on violin if you want. But we have a G chord, and in this position, I have G in the middle, D down here, B up here, but it's G, B, D. Then we move to a D diminished chord, which is D, F, A flat. And then we get to the suspended chord, the G7 suspended chord, which I mentioned in my first listen as being something that is an incredibly satisfying sound to me. G, C, F, and then we end up back on a C chord. C, C, E, G. And so that's our sequence of chords happening here. G, D diminished, G7 with a suspended 4, and then a C. Now listen what happens if I put a pedal point beneath it. It gives this incredible feeling of edginess and power at the same time. But it's a harmonic creation of this, rather than rhythmic or volume or tone quality. It has to do with the harmonies themselves. If we move it down here, you feel how satisfying it is to arrive on that final note. We've built up to it. We've had these intense chords here, but we also have this pedal point going on and on. Now, quick note, pedal points usually mean not playing over and over again. But on a harp, because the sound dies away, we have to continually replay. It's still a pedal point. The G7 suspended chord is a G chord, G, B, D. We add the 7, But instead of a B in the middle, that B is suspended, it's held up. It's a C. And then it could resolve to a simple G7. And then it could resolve to a C. In this case, we went straight from the suspended 7 to the simple C. All of those different chords and chord qualities give us these wonderful aural sensations of tension and release. This suspended chord here, it's tense. There's an edge to it. There's a restless quality. There's a feeling of biting into a lemon. And then that's what makes the following chord sound so incredibly sweet. Is that contrast. Just like if you bite into a lemon and then you drink a glass of plain water, that water tastes so much sweeter than if you had simply taken a drink without the lemon. And I'll put a link up here or down in the description, wherever it's going to end up. You'll find a link to some samples of other pedal points, which are incredible. And then if you go back and listen to the Longtime, that's going to be Foreplay. If you go back and listen to Foreplay and how Foreplay comes to the end and you hear these powerful pedal points as we're moving towards Longtime, I think that you'll find some similarities and something to really sink your teeth into harmonically that this piece has to offer us. And that's another reason that I experienced this piece as impactful, or as I said in the first listen, hard. Because I, as a classical musician, I come from a tradition, a musical tradition in which the harmonic scheme and the melodic qualities are incredibly important and a huge part of how we experience the music. That doesn't mean that rhythm is unimportant, but rhythm does not take center stage most of the time. And so we have these harmonic and melodic elements which we are conditioned to really sense and experience intensely. When I look for edginess, grittiness, a sense of conflict in music, I look for these things. Those are the things that naturally I find as providing this quality. More harmonically based, rather than just the impact of sound, volume, percussion. And that is why in this song, I ended up experiencing it as being so powerful, because this piece of music includes some of those harmonic elements in a way that is very, very familiar to me. And I enjoyed it a lot. Of course, one other piece of music, which you may already be familiar with because it's so famous, is the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. And also, the link is here or in the description, wherever. And it's by Bach. It's an organ piece, and it's the famous one that starts da-da-dum, dee-dee-dee-dee-dum, bom. But go listen to it again. Listen for pedal points where the organist just sets their foot on the pedal and lets it stay there. And feel how that builds the tension as the other music is running around doing its thing. It's a great example, and one that you might already be somewhat familiar with, so you might be able to relate to it a little bit more easily. All of this brings us into the wonderful transition from Foreplay to Longtime. Now, as I said earlier, these are two separate pieces actually, and I discovered in my exploration research process that while most often they're listened and presented as one, Foreplay / Longtime. They actually were released even separately so that they are treated as two separate songs. That doesn't surprise me, since they are so unique in themselves. But just like a prelude and a fugue, we all know the prelude in C. But it was never meant to stand on its own. It was meant to be coming before a fugue. Just like here, Foreplay comes before Longtime. And they are two separate entities, yet they belong together. Now, I've talked about the active bass part and the way it just gets up and walks. Another thing that I thought was fun was the inclusion of the clapping and strumming, clap, clap, chicka chicka ching, strumming moments in the music. It was a great little kind of a break from the other textures, and yet it was so colorful in itself. Maybe if we had a song using only that, it would seem a little bit, it certainly wouldn't feel as rich as it feels within this context here. Here, it gives a nice added textural experience. And the music, of course, throughout is very active, dramatic, dynamic. Another thing which I enjoyed was the way the guitar held these long, high, sustained notes. And there were times when the voice would be singing, and then the guitar would come in with a high note, and then the voice would come again. Or maybe other instruments, and then this guitar would come and back away again. It's the same sort of effect, again, going back to Bach. I seem to be on a Bach topic today. The Allegro from his Brandenburg Concerto No. 4 in G. If you look up that Allegro and you listen, you hear this violin at a few moments where it's just a sweet, thin line that's being threaded through the texture, and it's not the focal point. Other stuff is happening all around it, and yet our ears are drawn to that, and suddenly it becomes our focus because it's such a contrast to what's happening around. At the same time, it is so beautifully woven in. And the guitar here in this music, in this song, is nicely woven in, kind of like that. I mentioned in the first lesson that there are parts that have a little bit of a country gospel flavor at points, but again, I didn't feel like it was too much or overdone. Now, looking at the rhythmic elements a bit, I noticed something. And it probably wasn't intentional, but it happened really well in this piece of music. As a music teacher, I work with a lot of young children. And even in classical music, rhythm is incredibly important. You cannot have a well-performed piece of music without a sense of rhythm. At least the music tradition that I am familiar with. And obviously rock as well. If there were no sense of rhythm, we'd be lost. And young children don't think mathematically like we adults think. We adults have this, and music teachers often have this approach of teaching counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and subdividing 1 and 2 and 1 and a 2 and a 1e and a 2e and a. If you've ever taken lessons, you probably might find that familiar. But little children don't relate to that so well, and yet they are naturally musical. And then we have to ask ourselves, where does this rhythm come from? And it comes from movement, and it comes from language. And in this piece of music, I noticed that some of the rhythmic features were pulled straight out of the opening phrase. It's been such a long time. If you listen to the organ, bum, bop, bop, it's been such a long time, you can almost feel yourself saying, it's been such a long time. The rhythm of the vowels and the consonants and how they contrast with each other give a great bit of material for the instruments to work with. And then later, the guitar, the strumming. It's been such a long time, long time. It's been such a long time. It's been such a long time. It's been such a long time. Yeah. It's the guitar rhythm. And you can imagine it being pulled straight out of that opening line. It works well, and it's one of the things that helps meld everything together, hold it together, and at the same time it's interesting, it's varied. Even though there's a lot going on, and fairly frequent changes in texture throughout this music, which I commented in my first listen. This consistency, which comes from two different musical elements. The rhythmic support, which I just mentioned a bit, and it's not only driven by the drums, but it's also upheld by the bass and the organ accompaniment. Those three instruments are working very well together to provide this wonderful rhythmic energy that we feel in the music. And they do that by drawing their inspiration from the rhythm of the opening line of lyrics. The second thing is the melodic quality, which is really a team effort between the voice and the guitar. Sometimes we feel like one is leading, sometimes the other takes the lead, sometimes they're both working in tandem. It feels very much like a dance between two partners, and they complement each other very well. These are the things that stand out to me in this music as being some of the primary factors, primary elements that make it so satisfying, so enjoyable to listen to. Even though it's a style of music that is not my chosen natural musical preference, at the same time, I find it very satisfying and enjoyable when I listen to this piece of music. And that lets me know that it is very well done. Because when music is very well done, even if it's not something that we naturally gravitate towards, we find that there's something in it that can reward us, that we can relate to, that we can appreciate. And I did in this song. I found a sonic experience, and as I said, a multi-dimensional experience where I felt like I could get inside the music and have it around me. These are some of the things that make it possible for that to happen. Now you'll notice that a fair amount of this discussion around this song, as well as the links I've shared, reference the organ quite a bit. And of course, this song itself includes the organ. And so I began asking myself, why do I relate this piece to organ music? Is it because there's the organ included in it? Or is there some other reason that I find myself going to Bach and organ music as the things that seem similar, that have links to musical experiences that I know? And as part of that question, I had to ask, would it be different if there were no organ music, if there were no sounds of the organ present in Foreplay and Longtime? And after thinking it over for a while, I decided, no, I don't think that it would be different. Supposing they had managed to create a piece of music without organ that had this sort of musical experience. Why? I think there are at least 3 reasons for that. In one of my other videos, I mentioned that organ is kind of the electric guitar for the classical musician. It has this ability to give incredible power, incredible expressiveness. There's richness and depth to the sonic layers. There's a vibrant energy. And of course, we can have richness and depth and vibrant energy without the organ. But there's one other element which I think contributes to my associating it with that kind of organ sound, and that is the clarity. So we have richness and depth, we have vibrant energy, we have clarity. Again, all of these can come from other instruments, but in my mind, they come together so beautifully with the organ. It's kind of the center point where they all meet so incredibly, at least in the classical tradition. And that's what I find in this music. And supposing that it could have been created without an organ included in it, I think I would still have gravitated towards these other organ and Bach pieces that I mentioned, simply because it has that kind of energy, that kind of clarity, and that kind of rhythmic and melodic development. So there we have my thoughts, my follow-up thoughts on Boston's Foreplay Longtime. And I very much enjoyed this piece of music, and I hope that you will enjoy what I have to say here. And I'll see you next time.